Hi, folks. My name is Peter Stegner. I'm a partner with Riley Stegner Associates, along with Travis Jones. And I want to welcome everyone to our 2025 Forestry Day at the Legislature. This is put on every year by the Society of American Foresters. And before we get started, I'd like to, as many of you know, a colleague of ours passed away last year, Bob Maynard with Perkins Coie, who was one of the founding partners of this Forestry Day at the Legislature. So I just wanted to take a quick moment of silence for Bob. So just take a quick moment. All right, thank you for that. Thanks again for everyone coming. We really appreciate this. It's an exciting event each year. Our hosts today are the Inland Empire and Intermountain chapters of the Society of American Foresters. This year is an exciting year for the Society of American Foresters. They were founded in 1900, so this is their 125th anniversary, and so I would ask that all members of the Society of American Foresters please stand. The Society of American Foresters' mission is educational and scientific, focused on sustainable forestry for its members, society, and all who benefit from a strong and vibrant forest products industry. So thank you so much for helping us put this on. We also want to extend a deep appreciation to our sponsors who make this event possible. That you can see, well, when we put the slide back up, all of the companies and various organizations that help us do this. We couldn't do it without you. So I'd ask for a quick moment that all of our sponsors also stand. And now, before I pass this off to Dean Dennis Becker with the University of Idaho, who's going to give us an overview of the contributions of the Idaho forest products industry to Idaho, I would like to allow IDL Director Dustin Miller to introduce our new state forester.
Well, thanks, Peter, and thank you to the Society for American Foresters for having us here today. It's always something that we look forward to during the legislative session, and collectively we can all tell our stories together. Being the state land and forestry department, we work very closely with all of you. So really appreciate being here. And as everybody knows, Craig Foss, our previous state forester, happily retired in November. He was ready to hang it up, but he really did love his career, and so that left us with a vacancy on our executive team. And so I'd like to introduce Julia Lauk. She's probably going to be a little embarrassed. I gave her a heads up. So Julia Lauk is our new state forester. Also, she will head our division of forestry and fire for the Department of Lands, and that division oversees our fire bureau, Good Neighbor Authority Bureau, shared stewardship, as well as our forestry assistance bureau. So we're excited to have Julia here. She's from the state of Oregon, got her forestry degree there at Oregon State, worked in various positions in forestry and fire with ODF, as well as various positions in forestry and fire for the Department of Lands. And so very excited to have Julia as our new state forester and part of our executive leadership team. So if you get a chance, say hi to Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin, and welcome, Julia. Obviously, IDL is a deep partner with the entire forest products industry here in Idaho, and we appreciate everything that they do and look forward to working with Julia in her new role. With that, I would like to pass this on to Dean Dennis Becker to give us a sense of the contributions that the forest products industry makes to the state of Idaho.
Thanks, Peter. And yeah, just so I know a lot of you, but for those of you who I haven't met yet, I look forward to working with you. The College of Natural Resources at the University of Idaho, we work very closely with our industry partners, with our state and federal partners, private partners alike. So we very much appreciate their support for what we do, and as well as the support that the legislature provides the work that we do in the college, quite obviously. So my job is to set this context today, and part of that, as I'm doing that, if I could have somebody pass out these sheets that are at each of your table. So I'll put this in context a little bit, but go ahead and pass those around. So in total, forests in Idaho. You got your picture of forest, and we'll talk about the differences in those pictures, those images that you might have. It's about 22.5 million acres, or 41% of the land base in Idaho is forest covered. Now, that includes everything from the deep forests, the cedar up north, all the way down to those mixed forest types, ponderosa pine, Doug firs, that are on BLM lands that's on my wife's family property between Malad and Samaria. So there's a wide range of forests that exists in this state. And there's a wide range of ownerships. I think you're aware of that, but let me just point out who they are. So you have your large industrial landowners, right? So we have several of our partners, large industrial landowners here in the state, your Potlatch Deltic, your Manulife, your Stimson, your Green Diamond, and so forth. You have your non-industrials, which Charlie McKetta, and I'll describe the presentations here in a little bit. Charlie McKetta will talk to you a little bit about them and the behavior of small industrial private landowners. So that's a 5-10 acre parcel out back. The motivations and the things that they do on their lands is very different than the motivation and the management practices on large industrial lands, which might also be very different than the management practices on those federal lands, the federal BLM lands, tribal lands, private, U.S. Forest Service, state. There's a wide range of ownerships, of course, that all abut each other, and their management practices also abut each other. And I think we're going to get a slide up here in a little bit that's going to show how the behavior of those landowners manifests in terms of the harvest that takes place. And so this is what's on that sheet of paper that's passed around as well. Now, change happens every year. Some of these landowners are very much price takers in the sense that they're going to harvest about the same amount as they do every year. In that category, you're going to get more like the feds. The state, to some degree, is also a price taker in that regard. They're going to harvest about the same amount each year with some ups and downs. In this graph, you'll see that the federal lands are about 23%, which has been increasing over the last decade. The state lands, 27% of that, and about 50% of all private happens on those mixed private lands. So the distribution of that and how markets influence them, or threats of tariffs and other topics that are out there, will very much influence the behavior of these different landowners. If we can go to the second slide. That, of course, translates to differences in sales. So we know that there was a huge run-up in prices during COVID, which now has dropped down substantially from those highs. So a lot of your private landowners, especially your industrial landowners, are less willing to harvest timber under those situations, just for lack of revenue that they can generate from that. Still, 1.7 billion board feet of lumber was produced from about 1 billion board foot of timber that was harvested in 2022. These are latest numbers because of lagging in information that is shared. That generates to almost $1 billion in lumber sales in that same year, which again was down substantially from the high of 2021 and 22 from COVID. So if we go to the next slide, that of course manifests to different amounts of jobs. So all told, The forest products industry in the state of Idaho collectively is about a $3 billion industry. So $3 billion contributed to the state GDP each year. Of that, the industry in both direct and indirect jobs generates almost 30,000 jobs. Almost 30,000 jobs. So for every million board foot of timber that's harvested, 31 jobs are created. So a board foot, you can think about your square block. For every million of those, 31 jobs are created, both in indirect, those would be your cashiers, your teachers, your dentists, and direct jobs, those who are working in the woods, but also mechanicking and so forth related to that industry. So, yes, it changes over time. It changes as a result of prices, but the importance to the rural communities, the importance to the state's economy continues to be extremely important. So that's one point we obviously want to leave with you today. I also am going to sort of, at a very high level, sort of frame our speakers for today. So as I mentioned, these landowners are in conjunction or adjacent to each other, and how they manage for wildlife, how they manage for fire, how they manage for timber has implications and impacts on their neighbors downstream. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today from some of our speakers. We're going to address three key challenges. The first being diversity of ownership, the second being forest markets, and the third being forest health. And so each of our speakers will speak to that challenge area. They'll talk about the different opportunities within that area, and then they'll talk about sort of the outcomes or what's happening as a result of the work collectively that we're doing in the state of Idaho to address these challenges, because we are a very much a partnership-driven industry in this state, and it really takes all of us to do that. So with that framing, Peter, I'm going to hand it back to you. You can introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for that overview. Obviously, an enormous contribution to the state, both economically and then obviously from a workforce and labor perspective. So thank you so much for introducing those figures for us. And now that I believe most of our lawmakers and constitutional officers have made it, I'd like to take a quick moment and just have you all stand and thank you for making the time to come and be with us today. So if the lawmakers and constitutional officers could stand, that'd be great. Again, thank you so much for both attending and for all you do for our state. Our first speaker on that first challenge regarding the multi-ownership is John Songster with the Idaho Department of Lands. He's the Good Neighbor Authority Bureau Chief. I am proud to say that the Good Neighbor Authority program, of which so many of you are very familiar, that allows the state to collaborate with our federal partners in addressing critical fuels issues on our national forests, is the most successful, I would say, in the country. And that is in no small part to all of the lawmakers in the room, as well as the state of Idaho and, of course, the Idaho Department of Lands. So with that, I will open it up to John. Thank you.
Thanks again for taking some time out of your busy schedules. Again, I'm John Songster with the Idaho Department of Lands. I'm our Good Neighbor Authority Bureau Chief. And the two things I want to talk to you a little bit about today are the Good Neighbor Authority and Idaho's Shared Stewardship Initiative. One of the great things about Idaho, which is such a draw to our state, is our vast holdings of accessible land. Idaho holds some of the largest contiguous tracts of public land in the country and is home to iconic backcountry areas like the Frank Church Wilderness. But a lot of the forested regions are more of a mishmash of state, federal, private, tribal, and industrial forest lands. These are the forests where most of us live, work, and play. They include the urban interface, but also the area beyond that. These landscapes represent more than just a timber source. They provide clean water, habitat for wildlife, and are generally widely accessible spaces for public recreation. Managing in this patchwork of jurisdictions is a huge challenge. Idaho's population growth continues to push development further into these areas. Fires and insects don't respect property boundaries, and different landowners have different priorities, management goals, and regulations to adhere to. The Good Neighbor Authority and shared stewardship are two things that can help. They improve conditions and lead to better outcomes through active management. Idaho signed the first shared stewardship agreement in the country with the USDA and has been a strong advocate for the Good Neighbor Authority. Shared stewardship is a concept that's based on the idea that the threats we face are too big and too urgent to take on alone. The agreement is a call to action to bring together government agencies, utilities, nonprofits, and other stakeholders to share expertise and resources. The goal is simple: improve conditions by using every authority and tool at our disposal, from timber harvest and mechanical treatments to fuel breaks and managed fire. Good Neighbor Authority allows us to carry out work on federal lands, and it's also now available to counties and tribes. It removes red tape so we can engage the private sector and better utilize the local workforce. And that's a huge benefit because finding the capacity to do more is one of our greatest challenges. It helps expand the scale of forest management by improving access and economic feasibility. We can implement these treatments through timber harvest, which helps sustain jobs in our forest industry. And one of the most important benefits of G&A is that it allows us to reinvest timber revenues in more management. It's a locally sourced, readily available revenue stream to cover the costs we need to get the work done. Shared stewardship and G&A represent major shifts in how we approach forest management. We're making progress that no single agency or group could alone. At the same time, we have a long road ahead of us. Opportunities lie in expanding partnerships to do more. We need to continue to work with policymakers to ensure that we have the flexibility that we need to avoid being bogged down with process. And we need to continue to listen to our communities and the forest industry. They have solutions and are a source for innovation. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful session. And if you have questions or feedback about the work we're doing, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And we will have, as time allows, we will have some time for questions after the speakers. So if you have any questions, please hold those until the end. Our next speaker will cover the diverse marketplace, the need for a diverse marketplace for wood products. So please welcome Dr. Greg Lotta from the University of Idaho.
Hi there. So wait for the slide to come up. So I was told to keep it to 3 things, but then they also said that to treat legislators like I treat the dean. So I tried to get it down to 2 in terms of what you guys could hold. So what we're going to do is start off with the 3 interconnected ideas I want you to be thinking about with markets. First is silviculture, the second is merchandising, and the third is markets. And so what does all that mean? So we teach students these things. This is actually plots that students put in on my property with just little 8 acres out of Moscow. It is overstocked. And so silviculture is the act of managing the forest. And so what you have here are 2 options. These are my legislative cliff notes for you. 2 options in how you manage the stand. 1, you can add trees. So, right, we see there, we put a bunch of little trees in. That isn't necessarily what our issue is here in the state of Idaho. Maybe it is in places where there have been fires and we need to restock, but in general, that's not the option we're going for. we're typically going option 2. We need to remove trees. And so here I've gone in and removed some of the trees that we have out there. What I did here was remove them from below, so smallest stuff out first. And what you'll notice as well is they're just dropped on the ground. So sitting on the ground, that's where they'll stay unless we can utilize them. And so our option there, right, now we have to deal with them. Sorry, that's kind of a third thing. We have 2 options again for how we deal with these trees that are sitting on the ground. We burn them. Pile them, burn them. We may have to go in there and burn anyways because we want to get the slash and the fuel loads down. Or option 2, the one I like, we use them. And so when we're using them, we move to our second thing here, which is merchandising. So we have those, we can sell them. If we sell them, we can do 2 things again, right? So 2. We can lower the cost of the silviculture. So like John was talking about, you can treat more acres by lowering the cost of what it is that you're doing. And so that gives us more activity on a landscape, more fuel reduction that's occurring. And the second one is what Dennis had talked about there. It provides jobs and incomes into rural communities. And so that's a very important thing as well. So when we get in there, we don't want to leave those trees laying on the ground. We want to utilize them. We want to merchandise them. And so we get these 2 fabulous things. And sorry, here I did 3, so hope your heads don't pop. But we may reduce the intensity of future wildfires. And so that is kind of what we're thinking about as we're doing these types of treatments to lower the stalking, reduce the ladder fuels, and hopefully benefit industry and economies out into the future. Right? So when we're thinking, ooh, that's great. Okay. Hey, so this is some work that we had a student do at the policy analysis group that was part of the Forest Action Plan that IDL does, which was a great partnership that we had. This is looking at where you can sell saw logs in the state of Idaho. 3 little dollar signs there on the saw logs. And so we have low levels of market access and we have higher levels of market access is what Chad was looking at here. And you can see that there's areas in green, some of those are wilderness, where we don't have a lot of access, even with the higher value commodities that we're producing, right? Higher the value of the commodity, the farther you can drive it to markets, but the lower the value is to the landowner in the end. Those are kind of things you're working at. Second part of this, right? Not as only 2 little dollar signs instead of 1 $3 signs, pulpwood. So pulpwood, you're thinking pulp mills. We've got stuff up there in the Spokane area, Inland Empire. We've got Clearwater there in Lewiston. Not a lot of pulp options out here. Right? We don't want to be like Montana. They don't have any pulp mills in the state of Montana. And that means they have issues with merchandising, issues with actually retaining money, reducing costs on a per acre basis and treating more acres for fuel reduction. The last one here is biomass, lowest value of that. It doesn't travel as far. There aren't as many opportunities. But we can look at where in the state we have these sorts of access. And when you're looking at this, what you should be thinking is how do we increase the area that we do have access to these products so that we can reduce the cost and have more fuel treatment. When we're thinking of markets, moving fast here, right, when we're thinking of the big stuff, that is saw logs, mass timber, cross-laminated timber. These are great things, new access markets, new markets for large diameter, the higher value material. All right, we have a library going in here using CLT Boise. We have our fabulous ICCU center there on campus. Lots of places to use mass timber, new markets for that wood. You're displacing concrete and steel. It's a great thing to do. It's great to have the state involved in that. Second thing we want to be thinking about is pulp. When we look at this stuff that's sitting on the ground, not all that's going to be saw timber. Pulp markets. When I'm thinking of pulp, all I can think is we can't afford to lose any more pulp capacity. That's an important thing as far as merchandising and the markets in this state. So we don't want to lose another pulp mill in the region. And then finally, biomass. So most of that small stuff we're seeing there when we cut our trees down, it doesn't have really a pulp market that it's accessed, isn't going to be used for saw timber and lumber and things like that. We need products that we can put this into so it's not put in a pile and burned. That can be things like energy logs there or pellets, Northern Idaho pellets there, or new innovative products. So what you're looking at in the middle there, Boo, is a mobile biochar unit. So you can take these units out into the woods. You can take that material that would be burned and you can create this fabulous material over here that is a soil amendment that stores carbon in it and improves the fertility of the soil. So we can create those things out in the woods as well. And so when we're thinking about this, we know we need to deal with silviculture. We've got to get out. We got a lot of acres we need to treat in this state. Right? We know we need to be able to merchandise that so that we can optimally get to all those acres. And the final thing is we need to enhance markets and expand markets so that we have a healthy industry, and we're moving forward. And that is what I had for you today. So thanks.
Thank you, Greg. As you can tell, obviously, growing trees and harvesting trees seems like a fairly straightforward endeavor, but it comes with lots of complicated decision making, and also a robust marketplace and industry that can take advantage of those materials as they grow and they're eventually harvested. And I can say, both with the Idaho Department of Lands and all the industry representatives that we have in this room, there is no better place to be growing trees and creating forest products and taking advantage of some of these really exciting opportunities, such as mass timber, and a huge thanks to the legislature for recently passing a law that allows us to use mass timber on an accelerated basis. Than a state like Idaho and the inland Northwest. So thank you, Greg. That was fantastic. And that leads directly into our final speakers, who will be addressing Idaho's private landowners and challenges to forest health and the pace and scale of treatment on the final kind of chapter of this, which is federal lands, that I think will help maybe generate some questions, should we have some time to take those in the end. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Charlie McKetta, and then after Charlie, we'll be moving to Chuck Rohde.
Thank you for coming today. I represent the Idaho Forest Owners Association, and we're the people who try and coordinate, educate, and represent what we call the family forest owners, but what you might call the invisible forest. Because even though we're big, nobody seems to know we exist and that we participate in what the theme of this talk is: compatible sustainability. My message today is off key. Now, who are we? 36,000 owners by the last UI survey. 36,000, that's a lot of forests. They tend to be relatively small forests, but when you add them together, there's more forest area than any other forest ownership group in Idaho, except for the U.S. Forest Service. We're talking about 40% of the private and tribal land area is controlled by members of our group, and also people we'd like to be members of our group. Something about us, we've got some characteristics that are disturbing. We're older than normal. We're more educated than normal. We've got higher income levels than normal, which tells you you've got a skewed cultural distribution of owners that might have a skewed cultural distribution of values. And if I can figure out how to work this, there we go. Next slide, please. I'm not very good with technology. So what are these forests doing? They're generating all kinds of ecosystem services. I mean, we're talking about 1.7 million acres of forest, and These people are very much ecologically oriented. They produce water and they produce all kinds of things. But if you look at the graph on the right of this slide, they have been disengaged from producing wood. If you'll notice, that's a graph of all of the smaller producers. You can see the industry is the one with the big hump in it. The careening down red line is the family forest sector. We got more land, we got more trees, and we're not doing anything that is contributing. Well, we got a small amount. We're down 74% from where we were originally. And this is a huge behavioral change. It affects our economy, and I'll show you later. In fact, why don't we just start now? It also affects our sustainability. Because you've often heard the bumper sticker that says you can't cut your way to forest health. It's the only way you can get to forest health. And notice, if you don't cut on all this large forest area, even if your objectives are not to produce logs that you can sell, less harvest builds up your inventory. Build up your inventory, your forest health drops. Your forest health drops, the ecological services that were being produced by the healthy forest, they drop, and they become more fire prone. Okay? So not only is the disengagement an effect on the Idaho state economy, it is an effect on the future of sustainability of yet another large block of land. Could I have the next slide, please? So, why? Why are they doing this? Now, you remember the slope of that red curve? It careened down 74%. If you look at the green curve, for 30 years, there has been no discernible change in delivered log values. The only time you get an aberration is during 2009 when everything shut down. Nobody wanted logs to do anything with. But the statistical variability around that log price is very low. So for all practical purposes, these people are producing a good that is stagnant, that where everything else is going up, their product is not going up. Oh, wait a minute, why is things going up in general, except for this sector? Because of inflation. Well, what if we were to take inflation out of that price series? And we start to ask the question, see that red line? All I did was take the green line and subtract inflation. In 30 years, the product that this sector produces has dropped 60% in real terms, uninflated terms. So if we look at some of the reasons that this is happening, profitability is way down. And costs are up. Logging and trucking costs are up because they're sitting there with inflation. So we got a cap on log prices, but no cap on intermediate costs. So the return to the landowner is not from timber, even if he wants to improve his land for environmental purposes. He's trying to cut his way to forest health. He can't afford to cut his way to forest health. So the wrong scale is available to him to do this. And so we see the off-key message that I've got here. We've got a sector that is, with respect to the normal thing you hear at this kind of a luncheon, yes, forestry is good for the Idaho economy. These people, for a number of reasons, are not functioning. Well, what happens then? If it is not profitable, what we see is you don't hold on to the forest very long. Remember I said the people that now own the forest are above average income? They're the only people who can afford to own this product because it is a lost loser. The timber management aspect has dropped out of 10 goals for owning a forest, dropped to number 10. Used to be higher. And when we look at who is dependent on income from the forest, this new class of owners, only 10% of them are dependent. These are not, we call them family forests, but they are, very few of them are inherited. Most of them are sold. I've got 500 acres in Latah County, and I just talked to my kids about it, and they said, Dad, have you seen the plans for the condominium that could go there? I've been hugging those trees for 40 years. So I guess the message here, and I'm glad I followed Greg, because he runs a center in the university that is capable of looking into understanding reasons that understand why this behavior is occurring and potential policies that could help this sector again regain their position as major contributors to the Idaho economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. And I know that we're getting close on time, so I'm going to introduce Chuck Rohde, who luckily he's blazing fast in his presentations, and he's going to be generating the most, I think, interesting content for questions. So without further ado, Chuck.
Good afternoon. I'm Chuck Rohde. I'm a retired industry forester, 45 years in the Northwest. I'm one of Charlie's forest owners in 36,000 in Boundary County. I live north of Bonners Ferry. Hopefully some of you know that's still in Idaho. Mine's real quick. Mine's the federal land. So all of us living in Idaho have witnessed the steady, continuous decline in the scale of active forest management on our national forest, the lack of aggressive wildfire suppression, and the slow pace to address the wildfire mitigation measures on our federal lands. The U.S. Forest Service has not been able to effectively manage our national forest lands, and it's for a myriad of reasons, ranging from burdening regulations, environmental litigation, antiquated and expensive employee policies, a lasting COVID-19 impacts on their workforce culture, the lack of understanding what the economic contributions are, what the forest means to our local communities, and basic inefficient management and accountability. So I believe with the incoming administration, we in the state of Idaho, as well as other willing states, are going to have an unprecedented opportunity to help fundamentally change and reform the way the Forest Service operates on the federal lands. There's a strong desire by most of the people, most of us who live, work, and recreate in the western U.S. to support the efforts of the incoming administration to increase the pace and scale of the forest management projects to more efficiently and aggressively protect our citizens, their homes, and their properties from wildfires, and at the same time strengthen the economies of our rural communities. And we need to be, at the same time, more diligent in the spending of our government taxpayer dollars. So a number of actions can be taken to help Idaho and the rest of the country achieve more efficient management practices. But first and foremost, we must empower the states to participate in these efforts to a greater degree. We can expand the use and the applications of the Good Neighbor Authority that John talked about to beyond timber management, to make it a part of a permanent rulemaking process where the states that are willing and are able can have the option to increase their roles and control more of the management practices and activities on the federal lands. Increase the firefighting roles by the states by making the necessary policy changes and allowing and again empowering the state agencies to pursue their aggressive initial attack responses and to the additional jurisdictions for utilizing a more direct suppression strategies and practice on the wildfires. I think they need to increase the emergency authorities to streamline NEPA, and we're not even taking advantage of the ones that a lot of us worked really hard to get streamlined, and eliminate many of the numerous obstacles allowing states to expedite getting more work done on the ground at a faster pace and treat more acres. We needed to make it easier and less onerous in the process of hiring private contractors to help us in meeting all those management goals. Finally, my recommendations are to the state agencies and the legislatures and those in this management positions in this room, be open and prepared to embrace these opportunities when they come our way in the reformation process of the federal land management practices, and work with our federal partners to implement these changes. I believe these management changes will help lead to more effective and efficient and forest and fire management to improve the economies of our local communities. That ought to instill some thought.
All right, we're going to take a little bit of time here for some questions. Peter is roaming around with the mobile mic. And some of you may need to leave. We understand and we respect that. So if that's you, please feel free. But we'll take a moment here for some questions for our speakers. Who would like to start us? There's a lot going on out there in forestry today. We have the LA fires. We have markets. We have lots of things that are on the docket right now. Sure, Representative.
What do you think the main reason is for the stagnant prices, lumber prices not going up like the charts? The chart you showed that says our lumber prices in the state have been stagnant for years now. Do you have a reason for that, or is it just my excuse?
According to Greg, the dean's not smart enough to answer that question, so I'm going to pass it to Greg to have him take a stab at that. So Greg is back there in the corner. Greg, you want to take a stab at that, please?
What Charlie was showing was log prices. Log prices are different than lumber prices. Lumber prices have been fairly flat, which still isn't a great story. It's real prices more or less flat over that time frame, but costs have gone up, which means that what gets back to the landowner, so Charlie had mentioned logging and hauling costs increasing, so what gets back to the landowner in terms of those log prices comes down essentially, or the log component of that. So lumber prices relatively flat, log prices, yes, coming down as Charlie had mentioned.
Why?
So if I was looking at lumber and I was looking at where it comes from, we get a lot from Canada and we get a lot from the U.S. South. And the U.S. South can grow lumber like crazy, 25-year rotation on loblolly pine. You can use it. You can't use it everywhere. You can use Douglas fir, our primary tree. But it is a good substitute on lots of components of a house and where you're doing that. And so this productivity of planted pine in the South has been part of that. Part of that had to do with the pine beetle up in Canada. So interior BC, that was millions of, sorry to do this to you, hectares of land where there was a lot of dead trees. And those dead trees tended to show up in the United States in the form of lumber. About 25 to 30%, depending on the year, of our supply of lumber in the United States comes from Canada. So there's lots more than just our region. You can't just focus on the region when you get to lumber. It's a national and international game, and there's just different players in those markets.
Good. Thank you for that question. Solution. Well, we'll come back to that perhaps.
My name is Jim Woodward, a state senator from up in Bonner and Boundary County, so I have the same hopes and ambitions as Chuck Rohde that you know that's part of Idaho. My question is about the Good Neighbor Authority, and I am a supporter of the program. I'm happy to see the progress we've made. I know going into the Good Neighbor Authority, both the state and industry partners made an investment in that program with the intention that we develop a pool of operating capital to continue to run that program. And I thought that at some point we were going to start to bring some of that money back, that like we historically have seen a 25% of federal timber sale proceeds going to schools and roads in the rural counties. And I'm questioning if we're ready to, at some point here, to start to go back or to live up to that initial obligation.
John, you want to come up here and answer that?
Probably not the best person to answer this question, but I'll try. The way I understand it is counties have two choices: the 25% fund or SRS, one or the other. And in recent history, my understanding is the counties in Idaho have opted for SRS, secure rural schools, because it's a more consistent funding source, and basically because the alternative has provided less revenue to the counties. I can't speak to if or when that will change, and I think really it is a decision that comes back to the counties.
Yeah, I think what I know about this, that's absolutely true. There is proposals in Congress. There was a legislation last year that was introduced that would actually combine the SRS and the 25% payments so the counties could actually access both. When you take the 25% payments, though, they are less historically on a county basis than the SRS payments. You also have PILT payments that are also intermixed in there too. So there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. The reality is, as we stand here today, that was not reauthorized in the continuing resolution of Congress. So we're hoping that that will be in the final budget bill that would be passed this year, because obviously without that funding for the rural communities, and most of that goes to schools, that would be quite substantial. But the reality is a lot of lawmakers, SRS payments have been around for about 25 years or so, if I'm remembering right, and just a lot of new lawmakers who don't understand the original SRS 25% trade-off PILT conversation. So it's a moving target. So, yeah. Any other questions? Another question.
Jack Nelson. I represent District 26, Jerome Lincoln, Blaine County. Thank you. I represent Jerome, Lincoln, and Blaine County. A lot of your people on the other side of the fence, frankly, are centered in Blaine County, part of my district. And to tactfully somehow, you guys know it, and I think most of us know it, but to get the word out to the rest of them of the effects of their policies. Case in point was 3 or 4 years ago, a guy wanted to do a pole post small mining operation in the Stanley Basin. With a lot of protests, they turned it down. Mm-hmm. And if you're aware of the Stanley Basin at all, there isn't much of it that's left after all the fires. Mm-hmm. And with those things, just somehow to get the information to the people that, and in, I guess to say tactfully, to fund a lot of these things, they need a national contribution to get everything going. But somehow to get the information out there of what you're up against in good forest health. And you know, anything you can help legislators with to support you, I think we're all in. But the message just, there's a lot of people that simply don't get it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of partners in this room who stand ready to help with that messaging. And I know the Forest Products Commission, for instance, that is a major part of the charter of the Forest Products Commission, University of Idaho, obviously, but also individual companies. But you mentioned wildfire. That's something that touches all of us, regardless of what our opinions might be about the management on the ground. And so wildfire is one of those things that will forever bind us together in these conversations, because if that important habitat, if that beautiful vista goes up in flames, it changes. The value and the purpose of that changes, and so that's something we have to really keep front and center. So the Forest Products Commission, though, really that is what their role is in all this. Any other questions? Okay, Peter, I think with that, the lawmakers need to get back to work. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you again to all of our sponsors, to all of our lawmakers for making the time to be here with us to make this event successful. And of course, thank you to all of our presenters to help provide some education and understanding of the forest products industry here in the state of Idaho. Again, I couldn't imagine a better state to be doing this business and this work in, and so we just and you all are very important to that situation. So thanks again to everyone, and have a wonderful day and the rest of the session, and let us know how we can help.